Back in England, Willem began flying with the Fleet Air Arm, where his training would be tested every day on British escort carriers like HMS Slinger. Flying a fighter in hostile skies has its risks. But trying to land one on the heaving deck of a small carrier killed 4 times as many pilots as combat did. He flew an array of warplanes: the Swordfish, the American-built Grumman F-4F Martlet, the gull-winged Corsair, and the Firefly. Above all those, he flew the most famous fighter of all time, the Spitfire. Spitfire's naval version, the Seafire, with its long nose and narrow track landing gear, was not ideal for landing on a carrier deck. On November 22, 1944, the odds caught up with him. His plane smashed into the side of the carrier. He was presumed dead after the crash, but he was pulled out, badly hurt, and remarkably quickly, he was back in the air. Chief Petty Officer Hemminga posted 2.5 kills, shooting down 2 German fighters and sharing in the destruction of a 3rd. In June of 1944, in London, a rangy fighter pilot in the Dutch uniform was on leave and went into a popular nightclub called Odino's. That's where he met an Irish girl named Maureen McLaughlin, May Mac to her friends. By day, she was working for a doctor in Harley Street, and like many other Londoners during the Blitz, spending many of her nights down in air raid shelters, having already lost one home to German bombs. But that night in the club, well, it's fair to say she made an impression. The next day, Willem and Maureen were engaged. They were married in December of that year. It's a long way from the London clubs, but Scotland's roads saw a lot of the couple on a motorcycle with a sidecar, moving between several Fleet Air Arm bases all over Scotland. They got married barely 3 weeks after his near-fatal crash. Even with a broken jaw held together by wire, Willem was back in the air, mostly training on new carrier aircraft like the ferry Firefly.
Here is a news flash. Hitler is dead.
In early May, Hitler's 1,000-year Reich collapsed. And finally, more than 4 years after his escape, Willem was able to get word to his family in Holland that their son was still alive, and confirm for himself that they had survived. And he was alive and well, but there was at least one belly landing and a motorcycle crash. And at some point, Willem was seconded to Canada's Fleet Air Arm and flew with Canadian and Dutch pilots. And on his own time, there was some serious study. At least one document lists him as a theology student. But with Germany beaten, Britain was sending her aircraft carriers and carrier pilots to the Pacific, where Japan's kamikazes were targeting carriers. But in August, Japan surrendered, and the war was over.
We have never seen a greater day than this.
Willem and Maureen celebrated in Scotland. They used the tinfoil from the champagne bottle to mark the occasion. But the end of a world war didn't put an end to Willem's carrier flying. He transferred to the Dutch carrier, Karl Doorman. Finally, in December, he was back in Holland with his new wife. Holland was still recovering from 4 years of brutal occupation. The country had been stripped bare. There was no food, no fuel, no shelter. And in 1948, Willem and Maureen began another journey and crossed the Atlantic yet again. They ended up here, in northern Ontario. Picking asparagus to get by. In time, there were houses, celebrations, children, vacations, and tragedy. Willem became Bill, raised money for handicapped children, taught public speaking, worked to send a good candidate to Parliament, built a new church, tore down and rebuilt homes. He excelled as a systems manager for General Motors, set national sales records in pharmaceuticals, sold real estate, ran a country hotel, and rebuilt it. They lived in Windsor and Hamilton before moving 2,000 miles west to Calgary, and eventually retiring to a quiet spot on Vancouver Island, where he rebuilt the house. Maureen passed away in 1991. Bill Hemminga died just after his 71st birthday in February of 1993.